right, well, thank you, everyone. I'm going to just start off where Mr. Cervantes left off on this slide is just a couple quick reminders. We're going to be talking about a couple elements here that I just want to remind the board of. One is the implementation timeline. We'll be talking in fiscal years. And just as a reminder, our fiscal year runs from September 1 through August 31st. So whenever we start talking about quarters, we're talking about quarters within that fiscal year. I also wanted to add some information based on previous discussion on the estimates. These were estimates developed, especially for the new projects by Gensler. And we've taken those estimates from their master plan documents. Just to give you a brief synopsis of how they developed that, from the master plan, Gensler states that the cost estimates for the district-wide facilities master plan have been developed based on historical data for similar higher education projects, current construction market impacts, and knowledge of the particular project types. These are high-level conceptual estimates based on the current understanding of the project scope. There are many variables yet to be defined on each project, and all cost estimates should be considered as probable costs and not as definitive hard number commitments. So that is how those estimates were defined by Gensler from their master plan. So as we get in, I'm going to just do a brief overview of the master plan projects that were presented by Gensler. We won't get in depth, but for the Brenham campus, Gensler had presented 14 various projects for the Brenham campus in their master plan documents. They also presented 6 master plan projects for phase 1 on the Bryan campus. And then of course the 1 master plan project for the Relis campus, which is the Relis phase 2 administration building. All of those projects will be rolled into this implementation plan that I'm about to present to you. I also want to give you a brief look ahead at the phase 2 projects that would go on from that 27 through 31 timeframe. And so some of the high level projects that we'll want to keep you apprised of for the phase 2, the Brenham campus, we have 5 major projects, including a communication and data center, P3 residence hall, dining annex, sports and intramural zone, and an access road for that sports and intramural zone. On the Bryan campus, some of the high-level projects are the Fine Arts and Academics building, the Student Center renovation, and the physical plant expansion. And then on the Relis campus, if deemed necessary or needed, we would have a building 3 and a parking lot expansion. So looking forward into phase 2, there will be a look ahead into how we bridge from phase 1 into phase 2 in this presentation. So as I said, we have incorporated all of the master plan projects that Gensler presented for the Brenham, Bryan, and Relis campus into this presentation. And what we've done is we've taken a look at how those projects correlate, how projects become associated. We have various demolition projects that need to happen before we can build new buildings, roads that need to happen associated with buildings. And we've begun to associate those projects. And we've come up with this list of 16 projects to implement throughout this 5-year period, this phase 1 period, that will get us through phase 1 and bridge us into phase 2. So now I'm going to highlight what we have for the Brenham campus. Some of these are projects that are currently in progress, and that we've listed those because they do have some cost ramifications that Mr. Cervantes will present later in our budget information. But these phase 1 projects for the Brenham campus include the STEI building, which we're finishing up and we'll be having a grand opening on next Friday. We also have the P3 project, which will be opening up next summer. The Leroy Dreyer Field project, which we're getting pricing on now. We anticipate bringing you a GMP at next month's board meeting. We have the Brenham Old Main renovations, which you just approved last month, and we're going to be bringing you a request for a CMAR later this evening. We also have newer projects that aren't necessarily in progress. We have the College Avenue Street and Sidewalk realignment, the Mill Creek Hall renovations for the esports program, the Brenham Academic Building and associated projects. There are some other projects that will go into that. The Brenham demolition projects, projects that could happen after we move into the new P3 building next summer. The Brenham New Student Services Building and associated projects, renovations to Melcher Hall, a renovation to the administration building, and then our bridge into the phase 2 projects, which will be a sports and intramural zone out on the 30 acres. Highlighted projects for the Bryan campus are the Bryan Administration and Student Services Building, where we will consolidate some services from this Tejas Center and Building S, some other administrative services. We also have the Bryan Library renovation and expansion, as well as the South Campus pedestrian connectivity and parking renovation for the Bryan campus. On the Rellis campus, our only phase 1 project is the Rellis phase 2 administration building currently underway. They're topping out the steel now, and we are still on schedule for opening that building this time next year. So I'm going to begin going into a level of detail. Each of these projects, we're going to list a little bit of information on the scope, high-level scope, their schedule, as well as their budget, so we can keep these in line. And once I've walked us through all the projects, I'm also going to present the timeline that shows how we can implement these in a systematic manner, that we can complete these over the next 5-year period. And then, of course, how we can work through funding and be able to fund these projects. So to start off, we have the STEI building, the Science, Technology, Engineering, and Innovation building. As a reminder, that's our 3-story, 75,000 square foot building here on this Brenham campus. It's going to be opening up here next week. It's a $35.5 million project, and that also included the demolition of Spencer Fieldhouse and the updates to that site. That project started in FY20, we'll complete it in FY21. For the Rellis campus, we also have the phase 2 administration building I just talked about. As a reminder, that's a 3-story, 80,000 square foot administration and classroom building. That's going to have some student services on the first floor, a large esports arena on the first floor. Second floor is full of classrooms. The third floor is going to have our administrative suite, our faculty suite, a large multi-purpose meeting space. And that's going to be located just north of the Schwartz building. The budget for that project is $32.25 million. We started that back in FY20, and it will be completed in FY22. A very exciting building there. We also have the Brenham P3 student housing project, which is currently underway. This is a 4-story, 2-building, 77,000 square foot facility, 504 student beds. To give you a comparison, Mill Creek Hall is, I believe, 464 beds. So just a comparison on the size there. This project will also be associated with the South Monument sign. South and North Monument signs were a singular project identified in the Gensler Master Plan, and we have found that the P3 project will be including the South Monument sign. There is no budget implication to this project because it's all funded through the P3. And the schedule on this, we started this back in FY20, will be done in FY22. So this time next year, again, we'll be opening a new building. And now a couple more projects that are in progress. This is the Leroy Dryer Field renovations. We just approved this earlier this summer. This is a project where we will be building a new 5,500 square foot locker room with renovations to the existing locker room, concession stand, restrooms, press box, and ticket booth. And that construction portion we're doing with the construction manager and the architect is $3.9 million overall budget. And that will be done again this time next year, FY22. We started that back in FY20. And we also have an additional $1 million in funding we're going to be using for some R&R projects, which we will implement over this FY22 and maybe into the early FY23 timeframe. And those R&R projects that we'll take on will include outfield wall renovations, brick backstop, bullpen resurfacing, replacing seating and netting, adding some bird control, as well as scoreboard lights and painting the concrete. Again, that's $1 million budget we have for that portion of the project. This should be the last existing, I'm sorry, it is the last existing project. This is our Brenham Old Main renovations. This is renovations to the existing 35,000 square foot Old Main building. It is $3.6 million. $1.6 million of that is allocated for HVAC renovations, and we'll fund that through the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. And we also have $2 million allocated in unrestricted cash. And this is in addition to the insurance work, which is already funded through insurance. So this is started in FY21. It'll be completed in FY22. So next spring, we intend to move folks back into the building if the schedule holds with COVID. Now we're getting into our first list of the new projects, looking forward, projects that haven't been approved. And of course, as we begin looking at these, this is just a look ahead, and if and when these projects develop, we'll bring them back for board approval. So project number 6 on our list, first new project, is the Bryan Administration and Student Services Building. This is a new 45,000 square foot administration and student services building. Let me get the cursor over. You can see it's located here on the this side of campus. It's where the old church building is. As part of this project, we would build this new building. We would also need a road extension at Nash Street, providing a new intersection and a way onto campus. We would also be including the North Monument side to campus at that intersection with Nash Street. Of course, to get this done, we're going to need to demolish the church and the adjacent structures. And we would also be demolishing Building S. Building S is all the way on the other side of campus here. We demolish Building S, turn that into a green space, and move those functions into this new building. Just to give you an idea, this building would be intended to replace the Tejas Center. The Tejas Center has our student services functions. It's about a 22,000 square foot facility located off campus. And then we would also look at bringing some functions out of Building S, which house administration, human resources, legal, police, and our bookstore. And just to give you an idea, Building S is about 12,000 square feet. So just to give you some context there. This is about a $30.95 million project, and we would anticipate being able to start that in FY22, given board approval, and complete that in FY24. Our next project that we come to is a Brenham project. We're here on College Avenue. We would look to perform a College Avenue street and sidewalk realignment. This would be a 3-block realignment from College Avenue from Green Street to Blinn Boulevard. It includes removal of the existing angled parking, which if you've been on that street, we've actually painted that today. Restriping the road and the curb and providing curb extensions, demolition of the existing retaining wall and associated regrading, as well as expansion and extensions of sidewalks, new street trees, plantings, and pedestrian lighting there along College Avenue. This would be about a $1.09 million project. And again, given board approval, we would anticipate completing this project in FY22. Our next project is our Brenham Esports Renovations at Mill Creek Hall. So we have an initial esports program currently housed at the Doyle Coatney Center. This would be a conversion of the 2 existing classrooms at Mill Creek Hall, which previously had been occupied by the Engineering Academy students. Those Engineering Academy students are going to be working and studying out of the STI building now. So those 2 classrooms, about 2,500 square feet of classrooms in Mill Creek Hall, will be available for renovation for the esports program. To give you a little bit of background on our esports program, their roster on all 3 campuses is about 72 students. On the Brenham campus, they have 26 students. 30 of those students chose Blinn because of esports. And in the fall, 3 teams made playoffs, and in the spring, 1 team made the playoffs, and their only loss was last year's national champion. So a very successful young program we have there. Again, that's about a $600,000 budget for the esports program. And again, if given board approval, we could anticipate completing that renovation in FY22.
I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
How many people can we have in an esports program? I mean, can we grow that program to more than 26 or 30 students?
We can, because we can have more teams. But I did talk to Max Hibbs after our last budget committee meeting, and I think he told me you said 72, around 75 students. I asked him if we could take more, and he said he would love to have more.
Looking at our next project, we're staying on the Brenham campus again. This again gets into some associated projects, and this is a very nice academic building project. So this would be the Brenham, the new academic building and associated projects. And so what we're looking at on this map, this is Blinn Boulevard, running all the way from Main, coming all the way through the core of campus. You have the baseball field here on your left, O'Donnell Performing Arts Center. And this number 9 here in the middle, this is our current academic building. So the scope of this project would be to demolish the existing academic building and then build a new 2-story, 30,000 square foot academic building in that existing location. We would also, as an associated project, look for the replacement of chillers and pumps at the central plant building down here, building number 9, so that we have that added cooling capacity for the new building, as well as a project to install a monument sign here on the north side of campus here at Blinn and Main. The overall budget for this project is $23.85 million, and we would anticipate this project being completed in the FY23-24 timeframe.
Mark, can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
So you're going to put it in the same place demolish the old one? What are you going to do during the building with those classes and students?
We would anticipate being able to relocate students around campus. Obviously, we have the STI building with some classroom space. We have the arts and science building with some classroom space. Bullock building has some classroom space. It would also anticipate that Old Main would also have some classroom space. That on top of increasing some utilization, we feel that we could make that happen.
What subjects are typically taught in the academic building?
I believe that we have mathematics in that building. I may need some assistance on all the different subjects.
Oh, Marcelo, do you want to answer? I'll be happy to. Go ahead, Mark.
Good afternoon. We have humanities classes, English and math classes in that building. And some labs also for students, tutoring and learning centers. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this slide? All right, so again, $23.85 million project that we would look to do in the 23-24 timeframe. The next project on the list is our Brenham Demolitions project. This is a project that would demolish Holloman Hall and Memorial Hall over here on the right side of campus, the triangle over by the railroad tracks. We would also demolish Solon's Hall, and those would be available for demolition once the new P3 is done next summer. We would be able to move students around and gain that added capacity. That project would also include the relocation of the Small Business Development Center and the demolition of that building. Small Business Development Center took a look on the org chart. We have 3 staff members there, and we would propose to relocate them out to the Hody property inside the existing facilities there.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Considering the fact that there's the financial difference between a Solus versus a P3, I'm assuming we're going to shift the students in Solus and the dorms that we're demolishing. How's that going to impact costs for students?
I would need to turn that over to Mr. Cervantes to answer that.
Yeah, it's a good question, Trustee Wells. We would, the price of the newer dorm will be more expensive than any of these. You still will have some dorms that have we're still going to have a menu of costs that are the same the same as those dorms that we're going to be taking away. So our goal here is to say, we know what the most expensive dorm is, and it's Mill Creek. And then we have Wheeler, and now we're going to come in with this newer dorm somewhere below those 3. But the ones that are on the far end, the ones that are the least expensive, there still will be some of those facilities there. Our issue that we had is that in order to be able to put as many students in that we could in this facility, the price was going to have to come up a little bit, but we did everything we could to control that.
Quick question for you. The demand, where is the demand for rooms and housing? Is it in lower cost housing or in the nicer units?
I would have to say, I'm just throwing this off the top of my head. We have seen as students come in that the demand is more for the newer facilities. So there is more of an effort for them to try to get into that. Now we look at their financial situation, and we will do our best to not put them into those situations where we think that they will not be able to that they're going to fail. So we do what we can to just make sure that they're making some good decisions and spread them out. The athletic department, it seems like they're trying to group some of their folks in at the same dorms to try to keep them together for all kinds of, they have different reasons other than the money, but that's probably part of it too. Mm-hmm. So the answer to your question is, I think it's evolving, but what we've seen in the past is they have moved towards the newer facilities. There seems to be more of a demand in that area. I have a question. What's the, I don't remember seeing it in the packet. What's the plan for where Solon's is now? What's the plan of
The initial.
to go there
the
after you
phase-
demolish it?
The phase one plan is just to return it to green space. I believe in phase two, we are looking at expanding parking in that area. And that in the phase one, that would be the plan for all of the demolitions on this sheet, would be to turn them into green space. Moving on to project number 11, we go back to the Bryan campus now. This is our Bryan Library renovation and expansion, as well as associated projects. For the Bryan project, the library expansion, this would be renovation of the existing library in Building C, as well as providing a one-story, 10,000 square foot expansion. This would also include the library quad improvements, which would include upgrades to planning, some site furnishings, lighting, and include an area for hardscape and possibly a new monument landmark. The budget for this is $12.85 million. We would look to perform this in the FY 24-26 timeframe. There have previously been some questions on, when was the last time this was renovated, and I did a little bit of homework on that. This building was originally built in 1996, and back in 2002, whenever we built Building G, there were some functions moved out of the library. There was the bookstore that was moved out of the library, and the copy center was moved out of this building and moved over to Building G. And at that time, we did a minor renovation to include that in the library, but it wasn't an overall major renovation there. Again, this existing library, the space that we're talking about, the existing building right now is about 15,000 square feet, to give you a concept of that. So again, the budget for this about $12.85 million, and we would look to do this in the 24-26 FY timeframe. Project number 12 brings us back to the Brenham campus. This is the Brenham New Student Services Building and associated projects. The project here is indicated on the site of K. Atkinson Hall. So we would need to demolish K. Atkinson Hall, and then we could build a new 3-story, 24,000 square foot student services building to take the functions currently located in the administration building and move them into student services. This is about a $14.58 million project. We would look to have it completed in FY 24 through 26. And the functions in the administration building that we would look to move over here would include financial aid, academic advising, disability services and counseling, the registrar, and prospective student relations and enrollment management. Those are the functions currently in admin that we would move over to this building. There were also some questions about parking. So the adjacent parking lots to this building, currently we have the parking lot in front of the administration building. This is parking lot E. It currently has 31 visitor spaces, so that could obviously be available for student visitors if they wanted to go over to the new student services building. We could also look at assessing our parking plan and reallocating parking as the need aligns. We also have this parking lot D, which is just north. That parking lot currently has 61 faculty staff spaces. So there are 92 parking spaces in the local vicinity that we could realign to make that work for the visitor need. Project number 13 brings us to the other side of the Brenham campus. This is a renovation to Melcher Hall. If you recall in the master plan, we did a facility condition assessment, and Melcher Hall was identified as one of the better candidates for renovation. It is one of the newer dorms, but still in need of some upkeep. So this would be a full building renovation to include HVAC system upgrades, interior finish upgrades, and window and roof replacement. So we would intend to keep this dorm, the student housing facility, long term. This building was built in 1993. It's an 80-bed female building, and it's 20,000 square feet. The cost of this renovation is anticipated to be just over $6 million. And we would look to perform this towards the end of this phase one cycle in the FY 25-26 timeframe. Now we're at project 14, back on the Bryan campus. This is the south pedestrian connectivity. So during our master planning process, it was brought up that there's no real safe way for students to get from that far south parking lot back to the main core of campus. So a project in the master plan was developed for new grass parking island, sidewalk, shade trees, pedestrian lighting, and then restriping the adjacent parking around that area, again, to provide better access to the students. This is about a $250,000 project, and we would anticipate that this could be completed in the FY 25 timeframe.
So we're giving up some parking to do that, right?
Yes, we are. It's going to, I don't have the count right in front of me, but if that's needed, I could look that up for you. And then project 15, this is the last of the phase 1 projects before we bridge into phase 2. This is the renovation of the Brenham administration building. So as I said earlier, whenever we move student services out of the administration building, that's going to free up the first and second floor here in the administration building. So this project would renovate levels 1 and 2 to accommodate new administrative offices, relocating from Old Main. And that would be the accounting group, budget and business office, facilities planning and construction, human resources, institutional research, purchasing and marketing. All those would be located previous to the winter storm. Those were all located in Old Main. There are approximately 38 staff members from Old Main that have been relocated because of COVID, but they would be part of that group that could be located here in the administration building. That renovation is anticipated to cost $4.32 million, and it could be completed in FY 25-26. And then our project that bridges us into phase 2. This is a phase 2 project, but we could begin planning towards the end of phase 1 and implement it very early in phase 2. This is the Brenham Sports and Intramural Zone. The scope of this would be a new complex on the 30 acres out just south of the ag buildings. This complex would include regulation field sizes for 1 practice football field, competition soccer field, a competition softball field, a putting and chipping green, as well as a 27,000 square foot field house for locker rooms, coaches' office, training facilities, as well as a, pardon me, I've lost my place. It will include 115 new parking spaces and 2,500 gross square foot unconditioned storage facility for field storage. The scope would also include a new road connecting to Apple Way so that we could come off of the current circle, which serves some of the properties adjacent to us and gets us access to our ag area, and would be able to get us back out to the frontage on 290 and give us another access through campus. The overall budget for this project is $35.5 million, and we would anticipate this being in FY 26, so at the end of the first phase, into FY 27, so beginning the second phase project. Got a couple other circles I want to highlight on this. I'm going to bring you back to the core of campus to kind of give you reference here of some other phase 2 projects that could be implemented. So I'm circling the core of campus where the classroom building is. We also have Buccaneer Hall, Lockett Hall in this area. Of course, they're not shown on this because we're looking at possible phase 2 projects. I want to highlight this is where the communication and data center would be. So we've also in phase 2, we're also anticipating as we get into phase 2, a communication and data center. Of course, we'd have to demolish Buccaneer Hall, but this communication and data center would be a new 2-story facility containing a data center at the ground level and the communication center and IT offices on the 2nd floor. We would also be looking at a new P3 project on the core of campus, obviously if need arises. This P3, Gensler has planned a new 300-bed, 4-story residence hall that also includes 180 parking spaces. And we also have a dining annex. So another planned element would be a 1-story facility with dining room and kitchen facilities, including paving for services, loading, and some staff parking. So the block where classroom building, Lockett Hall, and Buccaneer Hall are located early in phase 2. Those are some projects that could also be implemented on the Brenham campus, and that would allow us to demolish the classroom building and perform those projects.
Got a question going back to the intramural fields. That's a competition soccer field. Would that mean that we will compete on that field? So we'll have stands and that type of thing?
That is correct. So the football field would be practice trustees, but we would be able to relocate our soccer and our softball and get out of our agreements with the city and play those games for competition on our own campus.
One more question. After the Eunice Kelm event, I took some time to kind of walk around the property back there, looking at the ag area and getting those guys to kind of show me what they were doing after we were talking about some of the things that we may or may not do with the ranch, the Eunice Kelm property, moving cattle back and forth, doing different things like that. And we need to determine, I see where you've got a boundary there, separating the ag complex from there. I'm assuming that that's probably not where their fence would be located, but they need to build a fence so they can figure that part of their project out. When can we help them figure out where that fence could go?
There are some discussions that are ongoing with that. And so we continue to work to truly define that exact location of that fence based on some needs that we're hearing. And sometimes those needs shift a little bit. And so we're still trying to pin down the exact need, but those are conversations that are ongoing. And I would hope that, I'm sorry. ma'am.
I'll add just a little bit too. I too visited with some of the ag faculty and leaders after the Kilm event, and we went on the golf cart and kind of drove around all of that area as much as we could. I know I have a better sense of what their needs are and what they're requesting. So I told them we definitely would look into that. They may not need all of the space that they are talking about. They acknowledge that they might need a little bit smaller space. So I think we'll be able to move on this one pretty quickly.
I think they've got their fencing teed up. They just
Yeah,
need to
they
know
do
what
have
to
some
do.
fencing, and they were telling me that they might bring it in a little bit more. They might not need all of that, and I've conveyed that to staff, so they're aware of it and they're talking about it. But that one is not a difficult one to do. So I think we'll move on that one. The one question I did want to have clearer in my mind that I shared with staff and with them is that I want to make sure that I'm clear myself on that road cutting in and exactly where that property line is, and how much distance there would be between things. But I know you all are already looking at that.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
So
ma'am. We would-
to answer your question, I think that one is a fair request, and we should look at that one pretty soon.
All right, and that's the last of our scope on this. So I'm going to move into the timeline for this project. So this takes all of the information that we talked about before. I've labeled the projects, laid them out in a timeline so we can see when they begin, when they end. And of course, you can see the clump in the upper left-hand corner of projects we have going on right now at various stages. So they're keeping us very, very busy right now in facilities. We obviously have the Brenham STEI building at $35.5 million that's about to wrap up here at the end of FY21. Then we get into project 2, the Relis Phase 2 building, as well as the Brenham P3 Phase 2 building, both going to finish up at the end of FY22, as well as the Brenham Dryer Field upgrades, which is a $4.9 million project. You can see I've got 2 boxes there. One indicates the main portion of the project, which will be completed in FY22, and then some of the R&R portion may bleed into FY23 as we plan that out. We also have the project number 5, Brenham Old Main Renovations, a $3.6 million project. That will be done around the Q3 of FY22. And then we start getting into our new projects. So obviously, given board approval, as we bring these back in front of the board, we would look at starting new project number 6, the Bryan Administration and Student Services Building. We would look to begin that in FY22 and have that completed early on here in FY24. It's a bit of a unique project as it's student services. They don't run on the typical time frame. We wouldn't want to try and get them in a new building in August because that's their busy time of year. So we need to shift them a little bit in the time we move them in. So we're looking at moving them into their building somewhere around February of FY24. I'm sorry, I've got that wrong. This is Q1 of FY24. So that would be around October of FY24. Then we get to the Brenham College Avenue Street and Sidewalk realignment. This is something we feel we could have done next summer. So this would be completed in FY22. Similarly, on the Mill Creek Hall renovations, this is given board approval. This is something we feel we could renovate those rooms in the summer when students are gone. So we could have that done next year as well. Then it leads us into the projects that begin in FY23, the Brenham new academic building. We would begin planning that at the beginning of FY23, and it would go through, we would have it finished up by the end of FY24. We also have the Brenham demolition projects. This needs to wait until we're into the new P3 building at the end of next year. Once we're in the new P3 and we don't need Holloman Hall, Solon's Hall, or Memorial Hall, we can commence some of that demolition. The Small Business Development Center could be broken out and done it on another time frame, but it seemed appropriate to bring all those demolition projects together. Project number 11 is the Bryan Library renovation and expansion. If the board approves, we would look at beginning that project at the beginning of FY24 and running through the end of FY25. Then we have the Brenham New Student Services Building. We would look at beginning that sometime towards the end of FY24 and finishing that up here, this is the one we would want to move in February of FY26. I got my projects confused there. So we would be looking to move in here Q2 of FY26. The Melcher Hall renovation, we would look at beginning that here in FY25, and it would run through and finish up at the end of FY26, so our students could occupy here at the beginning of FY27. We also have this small project, Bryan's South Campus pedestrian connectivity. That's a project we could do in the summer of FY25, finishing it up before students arrive for the fall of FY26. The admin renovation back on the Brenham campus. So this is a project we could begin at the beginning of FY26 and have it finished up that year. And then it gets us to our bridge project, which is the Brenham Sports and Intramural Zone. And that is a project we could begin early in FY26, and we would look to have it completed by the end of FY27 so that they could play and practice and compete on those facilities for FY28. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Cervantes so he can talk about some of the finances.
Yes, sir.
Mark, before you leave, just a couple of things that have come to mind that I think we maybe want to think about as we move forward in this. One of those is where the Bryan College Avenue Street sidewalk realignment. I think one of the things we may want to definitely do is get together with TxDOT or something and see if we can round that corner over there where the wall is right now, because you have 18-wheeler traffic through there, and they typically have to swing pretty wide to come up College Avenue. So there may, you may want to look at that to kind of ease that traffic flow. Or as an alternative, I mean, it would be, and the majority of those 18-wheelers are basically going to the Brenham wholesale facility. Or is it possibility that somewhere a discussion, I'm not sure they use any rail anymore coming into the Brenham wholesale facility, but the possibility of taking that railroad right away, which starts over here on Blinn Boulevard, putting a street through there so that all of that traffic could route off of the bypass onto Old Mill Creek and go straight through. It was just a thought, and that could potentially alleviate some of the heavy vehicle traffic through the center campus, because the other thing they're doing is they're turning on Green Street to go to Brenham Wholesale. So anyway, that's just food for thought there. And one other thing that I've noticed, and this is just because we're talking about planning and everything else, I noticed that by the Mill Creek Hall, part of that parking lot next to the Higgins branch is I guess you could say ribboned off where you can't park there. So I'm assuming there's some erosion going on there.
Yes, sir.
And I think we probably need to try to do something about that.
Yes, sir.
as well.
Yeah,
So-
that's something we're aware of, and we're trying to work through how to resolve that issue.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That was terrific. When we were going through the master plan, I kind of did cringe when we were going to get to the cost, because I thought, oh my gosh, how are we going to be able to cover all these expenses? And I almost had a heart attack just thinking what the number was going to be. But then as we started to peel back the onion and look at it, it became more evident that we have some possibilities to use some existing funds, and we still may have to borrow some money, but it looks like we're going to be able to do this without having to go through, at least through phase one, having to go into any more debt. I did want to say to you and reiterate to you that our plan is that as we go through each one of these projects and we get closer to some sort of implementation, we do as we normally do. We bring these to you. And the beginning here, I think there really won't be too many more environmental changes that you wouldn't be aware of, but we can't say 3 or 4 or 5 years out what it's going to look like. So you're going to have the administration as well as the board will have to do an environmental scan at that time and make a determination of whether or not or how we're going to move forward. It may change the priority. It may change. They may want to add something new in there. This is just a work in progress for us. It just gets us started. So as we considered this of trying to consider whether or not we're wanting to or would need to borrow any more money, what the board or what the administration does is looks at some very similar sort of items, and the next two slides kind of show you what we do. Kind of go through our thought process. We first look at our unrestricted cash. We are blessed with so much money. I think at one point we thought back in the spring, we were guesstimating that we would have about $121 million at the end of this fiscal year. It looks like that number is going to go up. 122 is what you're going to see when I do the financial report for July. And you look at the national surveys, and they show us at the 90% level. We are higher than for unrestricted cash. We have there's only 10% of universities and colleges in this survey that actually have more money per, you have to look at it per days or per months, and ours is really high. So we're in a good position there. As far as our bond rating, we also always look at that. Back in March 2020, when the pandemic began, Moody's and Standard & Poor's, these rating companies, they came out and said, we don't know what's going to happen to higher education. So they gave a blanket negative outlook for the whole sector, higher education sector. They've since retracted that back in the spring, and now it's back to normal for us. And in fact, we had a rating recently, just by chance, by Moody's came and looked at some things because they were looking at their numbers a little bit differently and wanted to see what the impact was to individual colleges. And Blinn came back at the same A1 rating and stable that we had before the pandemic. So we're in pretty good shape. But as we move forward, we're going to obviously look to see how it might impact us. And there's no doubt when you go to these companies, they're looking at the enrollment as the big one. And I'll just tie that specifically to the entity's capacity to be able to pay their debt. That's what they're looking for. And right now, they would probably say, if we went out there today, yeah, we may have said you're stable, but there's still some flux out there. So as we get further out away from this pandemic, I think we're going to be in a better position and stabilize a little bit more than what obviously we are at this juncture. We always look at annual debt as a percentage of our gross revenue over a period of time. Over the last 10, 15 years, our annual debt service as a percentage of gross revenue has been somewhere between 5 and 7%. This year is a lot higher because our revenues come down so much more, but we try to stay within in those parameters. And then on the next slide, we always are looking at the composite financial index. We provide annual financial reports to the Texas Commission of Higher Education. And they in turn look at these benchmarks, financial indexes, and I think there's about 4 of them, and determine what the standard should be for community colleges around the state. And if you're unfortunate enough where you're not meeting their standards, they make you explain in great detail of why you're not able to do that, and regularly come back and ask you to provide those reports. Blinn is not on any of those reports, and we're very mindful of that. We don't want to be on that bad guy list. Opportunity cost, you've heard me say over and over again, the cost of money or our ability to invest money is dismal at this point. It remains dismal. We're pretty much stuck at anywhere less than 0.5% that we're able to receive on our investments. It's not very good. On the other hand, the most recent bond issuance that we had in 2020, we had to borrow it at 1.8%, so about 3.5 times more than what we're able to make on our investments. So it makes sense to us from a cash perspective to use the money that we have on hand as opposed to borrowing. Other considerations, we follow NACUBO's benchmarks and try to, we do not want to put ourselves in a position where we're going to go out there and just borrow money. We have to have a project close to and be able to use that money close to the beginning of those projects. So we know that we have one bond issuance, and that's 2014, I believe. I may have that wrong. anyway, we have one bond issuance that we know is going to come off the books in 2023. We'll make our last payment in the fall of 2023. So somewhere in fiscal year 24, we're going to be in a position 1.4, it's $1.4 million of our debt that's going to go away, so we can replace that with some additional debt. So that's part of the timing that we need to consider. As we did our analysis to look at all those different projects and try to figure out how and when, we tried to match it up to Mr. Feldhage's project of when the projects, each one of these projects would start, where the cost would be at the beginning, and where it would possibly take us through to subsequent years. And so what you see here is on the far left, you'll see those projects. In some cases, we combine some of those, but for the most part, they are matching what Mr. Feldhage just showed you. The next column to that is the project cost, about $170.6 million through. Those are just phase one projects, the cost of those phase one projects. And then on the far right, as you go forward, of when we think we're going to spend money on that particular project. Let me just walk you through a little bit of this to show how we're coming up with these numbers. So that very first row is the amount of cash that's available at the beginning of each of these fiscal years, as well as some of our bond money that's still remaining. So in fiscal year 21, it was kind of hard to read, but $91.5 million that we had available in September of 2020. And then we use that money for the projects that are below that to be able to pay for it. So then that brings us down to a total project cost. The master plan of phase one, I did say it was $171 million worth of projects. That's the total of all those. And each individual year, that very first year, this year that we're in right now, we're planning on spending close to $41 million. You see that number kind of go down as you get further out. There's more revenue. I mean, there's more bond money available to us. So that's part of what's happening there. The next slide shows us how much money would be remaining after we take out those project costs from that beginning cash that we had in the bond money. So $51 million is the most that we would have in this fiscal year. You can see again, as we move over to the right, it begins to dwindle down a little bit more. And then we know that we're going to have some money left over, or we're going to be able to accumulate more money at the end of each fiscal year. That's what this is. We know with a great deal of certainty that first column, that 20.5, is actually going to be a little bit higher, because we think we're going to need at least another $1 million, maybe $2 million more. So the closer you're in, we can gauge that pretty well, that we have great confidence that we're going to be able to achieve those numbers. Next year, $22.5 million, we believe we're going to add on to that. The reason why we have that confidence is because we still have the HERF money, quite a bit left of it, that we're going to be able to bring back into the fold next year. So we're confident about those. Now, what we have looked at is over a period of time, 4 years period of time, we have averaged at the end of the year somewhere around $14 million that we've been able to add to the coffers every year. So you can see us as we move forward, it's somewhere around $10, $11 million. So we're confident, again, that's a fairly conservative number. We're also adding some of the money that we believe, it's not a huge amount, it's a very conservative number, that we believe that we'll be able to get from some of these P3s. It's a small amount. The biggest part is our normal amount, the $10 million. So that would bring us down to a ending balance. And you can see, like in that first year, that $71 million is what we would end up after we added and subtracted all. And you see that goes over to the beginning of the next fiscal year, and so on and so on. Each one goes forward. So it becomes your beginning balance. Now, we haven't touched the operating reserves. And so we're still, and I looked at the numbers, somewhere around $59 million. That's five months worth of operating revenue for our reserves for our normal. And then we have $15 million of capital and deferred maintenance, a couple $1 million for technology, somewhere around $59.5 million. You see, as you go across that, that's still maintained for the most part. There's sometimes we go a little bit lower, sometimes we get a little bit higher, but for the most part, that's there. Now, when I say we've conservatively approached this is a huge aspect of it being a very conservative approach, because you have of your $15 million that you normally have for capital and deferred maintenance, that's still there every year. And so I think we can always, if we get into a pickle, things aren't quite the way we think, we go back to this number and we'll be able to pull some of it out. That brings us down to the ending. That just is totaling up your reserves as well as the money that you would have at the end of every year. And then our bond proceeds. So eventually we think we're going to have to borrow. And it shows that in fiscal year 24, and that's pretty close to the time that I said in fiscal year 23, that fall of 23, we'll make that last payment. So we could borrow somewhere in there, or in fiscal year 24. It's also the lowest that we have in cash. You can see this 50 million, 32, and then it dips down to 8.2. So it's a pretty good time for us maybe to have to dip into that for a number of different reasons. And then, as I said, that NACUBO standard of trying to maintain, to have a project in mind, well, right around the corner is phase 2. We've got this athletic field that we're looking at, and somewhere around $35.5 million. So we're beginning to have money there to make money available so that we can use it for those particular projects. It's a transition into the second phase. This is just a diagram that shows the red. These are the amount of the cost of the projects on an annual basis, and then this is the actual cash and bond money that you have available. You see the spike somewhere in here. That's when we borrow the $35 million, and then this line up here is essentially includes your reserves. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes the presentation for the master plan. I think we had about an hour, but we've certainly got time for any more questions that the board would like to ask.
Yes, sir, Dennis.
Yeah, Richard and Mark, really good report. I appreciate you guys doing that. One question, I guess I don't agree with, or a comment, and I don't know how your priorities were set, but I don't understand why we're not putting that computer and data center improvement in the phase 1. I mean, it just seems like, they're cobbled together in the classroom building now, and with the online modality being so important right now, it just seems like that's an area we should look at it sooner, I guess, instead of phase 2. So.
And that could be something we assess. Again, this is a living document, a living plan.
Sure.
And as we get towards the end of phase 1, we can certainly do that. It is a very high priority project within the phase 2. And so for this presentation, it was just shown as the athletic field, but we could certainly also look at the data center as part of it.
Right.
Let me throw one other, because there was some discussion about this. And part of what you'll see in almost all of those projects, you'll see a portion of this. There's dominoes here. There's things that need to take place before you can do the next thing. That block is a domino big time, because there's other projects that you want to add into there. But before you can do that, you have to do one thing, and then before you move into the next one. And so right now we have athletics in that area. So if we're able to do that field, then we can move them out. And that's one of the dominoes that would need to fall. Now, it doesn't say we can't change that around, but that's part of the discussion that we had.
Mr. Sponge, you may have said this, and I didn't. I may have been taking a nap, but on your numbers here, did you? Do you have rate increases in here, or do you have an enrollment numbers to generate the amount of money you're talking about?
That's a very good question. It is you have to operate at a base of something. So this is assuming that things come back to normal. And you heard me say, as you get to each project, you have to do an environmental scan. You have to determine whether or not conditions are right for you to be able to do any one of those projects. The closer you are, I think we have a high degree of confidence that we'll be able to do those. The further out you get, yes, you're dependent on if conditions are still going to be or come back to a normal basis for you. So that's kind of how we looked at it, Mr. Moser. Does that answer your question?
I'm not sure it did. So you're saying what kind of numbers did you use from enrollment or for tuition or that sort of thing?
We did not, Mr. Moser, we did not delve into that. We looked at historically what we've been able to do financially, from a financial perspective. So we presumed as you get into, really a good example is fiscal year 23. So as we get into fiscal year 23, you're going to be able to see whether or not the P3 has been able to fill up. You're going to be able to see whether or not the Relis building has been able to fill up. And at that juncture, then you start making decisions on whether or not you have the financial wherewithal. If enrollment is not doing very well, you have to ask yourself some questions. Are we going to continue along this path? You can't just do it because it was up here and the master plan said to do it. You have to look at conditions to see whether or not they still apply. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing about this master plan document. It is something that we have the ability to change, revise, reprioritize as a board if we see fit to do that. And if we do not believe that financially we can do a project, we can say, no, I don't think we can do that project right now. So it is definitely not anything that is set in stone. It is a guideline. It is something that, and you guys did a great job, by the way, of laying everything out and putting the numbers down. And, and I guess, to a layman's perspective, looking at those types of numbers, that's a lot of money. I mean, that is a lot of big projects. But it kind of reminds me of, a little church I'm familiar with that has a little ladies group that raises money every year, different projects. And man, they like to watch that money pile up. And they never spend anything back on the church. But man, they got a lot of money. And that's not what I would like to see us do as a Blinn board. If it does our students and our faculty no good for us to pile up money and go, man, look at how much money we've got in the bank. What does make sense, as long as we can maintain that 5-month reserve and keep a good conservative outlook on that, and then keep our eye to how much actually we are adding to cash on a yearly basis. And I think that carrying through this plan makes all the sense in the world for the betterment of Blinn.
Yeah, and Mr. Moser, just to go back, we look at the financial side more. That's our bread and butter for us. So even in this year, has to be considered one of the worst years enrollment wise that we've had in some time. If you take away the HERF money, the higher ed, the grants that we had received, you're still over $10 million that we brought in the worst year. And part of the answer to that isn't just the revenue side of it, it's reducing the cost side of it too. So this college has done a really good job, I believe, in managing those resources in a way that puts us in that position, a very conservative position.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
I kind of want to connect it back to the student factor and versus spending money. I like to see it as us investing money. And as we continue to have top of the line programs like nursing programs and ag programs, and with a lot of the articulation agreements, we can't continue to do that with 20th century buildings and solaces. So I think that even though the pandemic has us at a point where enrollment is uncertain, if we really project that the pandemic is eventually going to be over, we want to be in a position facility-wise to continue to attract the best students. So when we look at those performance points based upon graduation and look at performance points in terms of GPA, we're in a position to continue to grow the college and give our faculty and give our students the best educational opportunity as possible.
Douglas.
I'm thinking, I guess you could say toward the phase 2 piece at this particular point in time. And I'm reflecting a little bit on some past practices that not totally, but in some respects seem to happen is we build a building and then we go do fundraising to pay for pieces of it after we paid for it. I think an excellent project would be, especially as it pertains to the athletic intramural, is to begin to build. There's always typically seems to be large donors when it comes to athletic facilities and things of that nature that seem to surface. So I don't know if it's done through the foundation or what, but start trying to get seed money in advance, which would layer on top of this and make things go easier going forward. So I think that might be something the administration may want to think about.
Yes, absolutely.
Good point. Okay, any other questions in regards to that? What is the next item on our agenda, Chancellor? I think that we're basically, yeah, would you please?
Trustee, thank you so very much for this excellent conversation. Just on your last comment, Trustee Bohart, we are on that one already in conversations with some people and with the foundation. Unless we hear otherwise, if you would contact Chair Kokorst or me, we will begin to work with our officers group, and we will begin to place discussion and action items on each of our agendas each month. So do anticipate then, starting as early as September, that you may see some action items that will come forward to you. You'll have opportunity to discuss, and then we'll begin literally probably within the next 30 to 60 days on some of these projects. And with that, I would particularly like to just ask Richard O'Malley and Mark Feldke, who we talk 5 times a day, every day. Why don't you just stand and let us thank you publicly for your great leadership. And Richard Cervantes also. I tell it to them every day. It's just a joy to work with you all, and your leadership is amazing. And also be sure, if you have an opportunity during the break, to wish Richard O'Malley happy granddad moment. Right. With that, Chair Kokorst will return it to you. Thank you so very much, trustees.
Very great. If there's no other discussion, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the board workshop. Moved. Second. Moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We're adjourned, 5:07.